I got this Arteza paint a while ago, and I have used it here and there in my fluid painting, but I haven't really given it a good test, so I wanted to give it my normal test where I put it up against Craftsmart and only use water to thin so that we can just see the paint on its own and how it compares. On the left, I'm going to be testing the Arteza, and on the right, I'm going to be testing the Craftsmart acrylic craft paint, and I'm only going to be thinning with water, and I do that just as a control so that I'm not adding any extra variables. Let's just see how the paint is on its own. I will be tracking the amount of water it takes to get this to the right consistency so that we can compare how far the paint goes in comparison to each other, as well as I will be doing just the control dirty cup flip, which has quite a few variables to it, but it's a good control test because it's one of my favorite ones to test and to start people off with when they are learning to fluid paint. I picked some similar colors that I had in both of the paints, so I'm going to be using a blue, a bright blue, kind of like an ultramarine. They have different names, but they're as close as I can get to match the two different brands, yellow and a silver. So with this, I am curious to know whether or not, especially since I'm using the blue and the yellow, if they're going to mix together and make green and I'm not going to have as much color separation. And then I want to see how pigmented things are there going to be any cells? And I also want to see when it dries what the finish is like. Is it going to be matte or shiny? Is it going to look pliable? Is it going to crack? And since I'm using metallic, which metallic is going to be the shiniest? I tried to mirror as best I could the same amount of paint in each one of these containers. So for the blues, I think I did about 10 milliliters of each, and then I replicated that on the right with the Craftsmart as well. It was a little hard to measure the Arteza paint quantities because it is a pretty heavy-bodied acrylic. I don't know if it would be a true heavy body, but it's not as liquid, so it doesn't fall into the canister quite as well. That little detail in itself should tell us a little something about the paint. It's more watery, the Craftsmart is, than the Arteza. So we know already that we're going to need more water or thinning agent in order to get the Arteza to a workable consistency. This can be a little bit more trouble, but it does mean that the paint is going to go further for you. So what we want to make sure is that the colors are still going to be nice and bold and not diluted once we do this. And we also want to make sure it can get to that workable consistency. In general, what I found is the Arteza required 3 to 4 pipettes of water, depending on the color and the amount I put in there. I put in between 15 and 20 milliliters of paint in each one of those, and I found that that meant that it was either kind of a 1-to-1, like the yellow, 3 pipettes at 3 milliliters each means that that is 15, and I put 15 milliliters of paint in there, so it was about a 1-to-1 ratio of paint to water. That will change if we add any other thinning agents because they have different viscosities, whereas the Craftsmart doesn't require very much water at all in comparison, so we only need to add in about 1.5 pipettes for every 15 milliliters, making it more of a 1-to-3 ratio with 1 parts water and 3 parts paint. And now it's time to actually do our dirty cup pours. So my expectation of these paints is Craftsmart is an acrylic craft paint, and typically they have less pigmentation, so I already kind of know that the colors on the Arteza side should be more vibrant, so I am expecting bolder colors from the Arteza than I am from the Craftsmart. Craftsmart, in my experience, makes really good kind of fluid, spacey type themed marbling effects. You don't get a ton of cells from it, but if you really like things that kind of look like planetary storms, it's a really good paint for that. And I really don't know what to expect from the Arteza. Are there going to be a bunch of cells or lacing, or is it going to act in a similar way? So I did my normal dirty cup pour where I did pour straight in, so there's a little more disruption because I wanted to see if I could get some cells. That does add in a little variation in the variables, but that's what I felt like doing, so that's what I did. And I'm doing this on little 5x7 canvases, so I don't need a ton of paint, and I can already tell that I think I might have over-thinned the Craftsmart just a tad by maybe even just like a half or a quarter pipette of water each. So it required even less water than I initially thought. And now for my favorite part, the release. Okay, so we already have some data. The blue is a lot more vibrant, and I already knew that going in. Any sort of artist grade paint or more like an actual acrylic rather than just a craft paint always has way better pigmentation with the blues. I am seeing some muddying of colors, so the blue and the yellow are definitely kind of blending together to make a bit of a green on the Arteza, and I suspect a little bit on the Craftsmart, but I'm not getting too much of that yellow showing up at all. One thing that I am surprised by is there are some bigger cells on the Craftsmart than on the Arteza. I had kind of thought that there might be more cells from the Arteza type paint. I will finish stretching these and let's do a final analysis of the actual pouring process, and then we'll also revisit this from the next day to see how they dried. I am getting muddying on both of these, but it does seem a little more pronounced on the Arteza, which is really surprising to me. Those two colors really kind of flowed together, and I suspect that that would be lessened if we use some sort of medium for thinning instead, something like Floetrol or any acrylic pouring medium. But I really expected that to happen in the Craftsmart. And it is, but it seems to be a layered effect, because where you can see the yellow popping through, it's more true to the original pigment than in the Arteza one. And again, I am surprised by the fact that there are more cells in this Craftsmart. I wish I had actually kept it where it was before I moved it this time, because I think it was more interesting. But, you know, sometimes we move things a little bit too much because we can't help ourselves. Personally, for me, I like the effects of the Craftsmart more, but I wish that I could have those effects with the pigmentation of the Arteza ones, because I like that kind of smooth flowing effect with those cells that pop up, rather than kind of the ripply effect that the Arteza has. But I do wish that there was more depth to the colors, and this blue is, I think, the second darkest blue. I didn't use the navy blue because that was not the right kind of color scheme to match with the Arteza one, but I do wish that there was more depth with these colors for Craftsmart. And here we are the second day, and the colors have muted a little bit for both of them when they're dry. Typically when they're wet, they look more vibrant, but I'm still pretty impressed with the colors of the Arteza paint, and that silver is nice and shiny. The finish is smooth and there is no cracking on this. There are a few lumps, and I thought that I had got this mixed really well, but I do think that the container that these Arteza paints came in, sometimes it dries out a little bit in the neck of there. It appears that they have actually fixed that, because they don't sell them in these pouches anymore. So the set that I bought back in April of 2020 cost me about $45, and it came with 14 different pouches of colors. I thought this was an okay price for that many paints, but it's a little bit pricey compared to something like the Craftsmart paint. And now it's looking like these are currently unavailable. There have been shortages of art supplies on and off for the last year or so, and it does also look like they're switching over to more of a normal tube shape rather than these pouches. And they're also really specializing in pouring paints, so I think that might be something I'm going to test next, or some of these, they're pre-mixed pouring paints. Would I actually recommend these for fluid painting? I mean, if you have them, sure, go ahead and use them, but I would not say to go out and purchase these specifically for this. I think there are much better options like acrylic paint if you're looking for something with more pigmentation, Anita's, maybe even Craftsmart. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like more videos like this where I test different fluid painting, I also have some watercolor tutorials and some other experimentations. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I'd love to see you there. If you have other suggestions for what I should do, let me know in the comments. Also, if you have experience with the Arteza paint, let me know that as well, and I hope that you have a magically creative day.